Have you ever wondered why the moment you get closer to someone, they suddenly pull away? Why the person who once felt warm, attentive, and deeply connected slowly becomes distant, quiet, almost unreachable? You replay every moment in your mind, every message, every conversation. You ask yourself the same painful question again and again. What did I do wrong? But what if the truth is far more complicated than that? What if their distance was never about your worth, but about their fear? Avoidant people don't run because they don't feel something. In many cases, they run because they feel too much. Closeness awakens something inside them that feels overwhelming. Emotional dependence feels like a loss of control, and control for them equals safety. So the moment intimacy becomes real, something inside them tightens. You feel it first in the silence. The replies get shorter. The warmth fades. The energy changes. The person who once leaned toward you now leans away. And instinctively, you react the way most people do when connection starts slipping through their fingers. You try harder. You explain yourself more. You send longer messages. You try to reassure them. You try to fix the distance. You try to prove that the connection is real. But something strange happens. The harder you reach for them, the faster they disappear. This is the painful paradox of the avoidant mind. What feels like love to you feels like pressure to them, and pressure triggers their deepest survival instinct: escape. Not because they hate you, not because they want to hurt you, but because their nervous system reads emotional closeness as danger. So they retreat into distance where they feel safe again, and the person left behind feels confused, rejected, and powerless. But here is something most people never realize. The dynamic between you and an avoidant is not random. It follows a very predictable emotional pattern, a pattern studied for decades in psychology and attachment research. And once you understand that pattern, the entire story begins to look different. Because the truth is, the avoidant is not as emotionally unaffected as they appear. They feel the connection. They remember the closeness. They think about it more than they show. But the moment they sense that someone is emotionally chasing them, their mind interprets that as a threat to their independence. So the distance grows. Yet something equally powerful happens when the opposite energy appears, when the chasing stops, when the emotional pressure disappears, when the person they expected to keep reaching suddenly becomes calm, grounded, and still. At first, the avoidant feels relief, space, freedom. But human psychology has a strange twist. The moment freedom becomes real, curiosity begins to wake up. Because the avoidant expected something. They expected pursuit. They expected emotional intensity. They expected you to try harder to pull them back. And when that pattern breaks, their mind starts asking questions. Why did they stop chasing? Why do they suddenly seem calm? Why does it feel like the connection is slipping away without resistance? These questions begin quietly. But curiosity is powerful. It slowly turns attention back toward the person they walked away from. Because humans are wired to notice change, and when someone who once reached for them stops reaching, the emotional balance shifts in ways the avoidant did not anticipate. Something that once felt overwhelming now starts to feel distant. And distance has a strange effect on the human mind. It amplifies memory. Moments that once felt ordinary begin to feel meaningful. Conversations replay in their thoughts. Small details return. The comfort of the connection, the safety of the laughter, the emotional presence they once had access to. And suddenly the silence they created begins to feel different, not peaceful, but uncertain. Because when someone stops trying to hold on, it introduces a possibility the avoidant rarely prepares for, the possibility that the connection might truly disappear, And when that possibility becomes real, the story inside their mind begins to change. And that is the moment the emotional gravity begins to shift. Because when someone believes they can leave whenever they want, the connection feels optional. It feels safe to ignore, easy to postpone, easy to take for granted. But when the energy they relied on quietly disappears, the mind starts searching for it. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. At first, it shows up as a small thought in the background, a memory, a question, a strange feeling that something familiar is no longer there. Avoidant people are experts at suppressing emotions. They learned early in life that independence protects them. Distance keeps them safe. Needing no one means no one can hurt them. So they built walls, strong ones. But walls do not erase human instinct. Deep inside, every person still longs for connection, still wants to feel understood, still wants someone who sees them beyond the surface. And when that rare connection appears, even the avoidant mind notices it. The problem is not the feeling. The problem is the fear that comes with it. Fear of dependence, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control. So when closeness grows, their instinct says run. But when the person they ran from suddenly stops chasing, something unexpected begins to happen. The emotional power shifts. You are no longer standing outside their walls asking to come in. You are simply living your life, calm, grounded, unbothered. And that calmness sends a message more powerful than any explanation. It says you are not desperate. It says your world does not collapse without them. It says your value does not depend on their attention. That kind of energy is rare, and the avoidant mind notices rare things. At first, they try to ignore it. They distract themselves, they focus on other things, they tell themselves it doesn't matter. But curiosity is stubborn. It returns late at night when the world is quiet. It returns when they see something that reminds them of you. It returns when they notice your absence where your presence once was. And suddenly the story they told themselves begins to crack. The story that leaving was easy. The story that the connection was not that important. Because the truth is beginning to surface. What they walked away from was not ordinary. It was someone who cared, someone who tried, someone who showed up with real emotional presence. And that kind of presence becomes more valuable the moment it is no longer guaranteed. Human psychology is wired this way. We chase certainty when it disappears. We notice value when it becomes scarce. And when the avoidant realizes the emotional safety they once had might not be waiting anymore, something shifts inside them. Not panic, not desperation, something deeper. Awareness. They begin observing you differently. Your silence, your calmness, your ability to move forward without collapsing. And that strength unsettles them in ways they cannot easily explain, because the version of you they expected was someone who would keep waiting, someone who would keep chasing, someone who would keep proving their love again and again. But now the script has changed, and when the script changes, the mind begins searching for answers. Did they lose someone who actually understood them? Did they misread the situation? Did they walk away too quickly? These questions grow slowly, but every unanswered question pulls their attention back toward you, because the human brain hates unfinished emotional stories. It wants closure. It wants certainty. It wants to understand what changed, and that is where your quiet strength becomes powerful, not because you are trying to win them back, but because you are no longer trying to control the outcome. You are simply reclaiming your energy, your focus, your peace. And ironically, that is the exact moment the avoidant begins to feel something they rarely allow themselves to feel. The weight of losing someone who did not beg them to stay. The weight of realizing that real connection does not wait forever. And when that realization sinks in, Even the most distant heart begins to look back. And once that weight appears, the avoidant mind can no longer pretend nothing happened, because something inside them begins to wake up. It starts quietly, a thought that lingers longer than usual, a memory that refuses to fade, a moment where they catch themselves wondering what you're doing now, who you're becoming, whether the space they created has turned into permanent distance. This is the moment the emotional balance changes completely. Before, they believed the connection would always be there, even if they stepped back, even if they went silent, even if they disappeared for a while. Your presence felt guaranteed. But the moment that guarantee vanishes, the mind begins to treat the connection differently. Value grows where certainty once lived, and the avoidant feels something unfamiliar: responsibility. Not the kind forced by pressure, not the kind pushed by emotional demands. A quiet internal realization that they may have underestimated what they walked away from. Because people who carry real emotional depth are rare. People who offer patience, understanding, and presence without manipulation are even rarer. And when someone like that stops reaching, the silence speaks louder than any words ever could. It says the connection mattered, but it also says your dignity matters more. That message unsettles the avoidant mind, because it removes the illusion of control. For a long time, they believed they held the emotional power. They believed they could step in and out of the connection without consequence. They believed you would always be there when they decided to return. But now there is uncertainty, and uncertainty awakens attention. They begin noticing small things: your absence from their notifications, your calm distance, the way your energy no longer circles around them. At first, they tell themselves it's nothing, but the human mind is sensitive to emotional shifts. When someone who once invested deeply pulls their energy back, it creates a void, and voids demand to be filled. This is where something powerful begins happening inside the avoidant. Their defenses slowly lose their purpose, because those defenses were designed to protect them from emotional pressure. Now there is no pressure, no chasing, no pleading, just space. And space forces reflection. Without realizing it, they begin comparing the present with the past, the quiet moments they once shared with you, the comfort they felt around you, the strange sense of emotional safety that rarely appears in their life. Avoidants rarely admit it, but deep down they crave that safety. They just fear losing themselves inside it. But when that safety disappears completely, the fear begins to change form. The fear of closeness slowly transforms into the fear of losing something meaningful. And that fear grows stronger every day your life continues moving forward, because nothing triggers reflection like the possibility of permanent loss. They start wondering if you've changed, if someone else has entered your life, if the emotional door they once walked through so casually is now closed. And when those thoughts appear, something unexpected happens. The distance they once needed begins to feel uncomfortable. The silence becomes heavier. The absence becomes louder. And slowly, the avoidant begins moving in the direction they once ran from. Not because they suddenly became a different person, but because human nature responds to emotional reality. When someone stops chasing, the dynamic transforms. You are no longer the one asking for closeness. You are the one holding your ground. And grounded energy has gravity. It pulls attention. It pulls curiosity. It pulls people back toward the place where the connection once lived. This is why the shift must remain real. Not a performance, not a strategy. A genuine return to your own center, your own life, your own sense of self. Because the moment your focus leaves the avoidant and returns to your own growth, something powerful happens. You stop shrinking to keep someone comfortable. You stop sacrificing your peace for someone else's uncertainty. You become emotionally steady, and emotional steadiness is magnetic. It does not beg. It does not chase. It simply exists. And when the avoidant finally feels the gravity of that energy, they begin to realize something they were not prepared for. The person they once took distance from may have been the rare connection they were searching for all along. And that realization changes everything, because the avoidant is no longer looking at the past the same way. The story they once told themselves begins to break apart. The belief that distance protected them starts to feel incomplete. Something inside them starts whispering a different truth. Maybe the connection was real. Maybe the person they walked away from was not trying to trap them, but simply trying to love them. And when that thought takes hold, it becomes difficult to ignore. Avoidants spend years convincing themselves that independence is the safest path. They learn to detach quickly. They learn to keep emotions contained. They learn to walk away before anyone can truly reach the parts of them they protect the most. But deep down, the human heart does not stop needing connection. It simply hides it. So when someone appears who offers warmth without control, closeness without pressure, understanding without judgment, the experience leaves a mark, even if they run from it, especially if they run from it, because the mind remembers what felt different, and once the possibility of losing that difference becomes real, something powerful begins unfolding inside them. Regret. Not loud regret, quiet regret. The kind that shows up when they see something that reminds them of you. The kind that appears when a memory suddenly feels heavier than before. The kind that grows when they realize the emotional safety they once had may no longer be waiting. That realization creates tension inside the avoidant mind. Part of them still fears closeness, but another part begins asking a dangerous question. What if I made a mistake? That question has weight. It forces them to confront something they rarely allow themselves to feel. Vulnerability. Because admitting they might have lost someone meaningful means admitting the connection mattered more than they were willing to say. And this is where the emotional gravity becomes impossible to ignore. The stronger and calmer you become, the more visible your absence becomes in their life. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting what they walked away from. They begin noticing the difference between the connections around them and the one they had with you. Surface conversations feel empty. Temporary attention feels shallow. Because once someone experiences genuine emotional presence, it becomes difficult to replace. And the avoidant begins to understand something they avoided before. Real connection is rare. Not everyone offers patience. Not everyone offers understanding. Not everyone offers the kind of emotional stability that allows someone to feel safe while still feeling free. When they realize that, the emotional tension inside them grows stronger, because the more they reflect, the more they see what they left behind, and suddenly the idea of returning begins to appear. Not as a plan, as a pull, a quiet internal pull toward the person who once saw them clearly. But this is the moment where your strength matters more than ever, because if they feel that the old dynamic still exists, the same pattern will repeat. They will step closer, then retreat again. They will test the connection, then hide from it, and the cycle will continue. That is why the shift must remain real. You are no longer the person waiting for them to decide your worth. You are no longer the person chasing someone who cannot face their own emotions. You have stepped into something stronger: self-respect, clarity, emotional stability, and that energy changes the entire dynamic. Because now, if they move toward you, they are not returning to control. They are returning to a connection that exists between two people who stand on equal ground. No chasing, no begging, no emotional surrender, just presence, just honesty, just the quiet strength of someone who knows their value. And when the avoidant finally senses that shift fully, something powerful happens. The person they once ran from is no longer someone they can take for granted. You have become someone they must reach for, someone they must meet with real effort, someone whose presence is no longer guaranteed. And when that truth settles inside them, the distance they once needed begins to feel like the very thing standing between them and the rare connection they were too afraid to hold on to. And when that truth finally lands, the entire emotional landscape shifts again. What once felt distant now feels unfinished. What once felt safe now feels empty, because the avoidant begins to understand something that is difficult to admit, but impossible to ignore. The distance they created did not erase the connection. It only delayed the moment they would have to face it. And now that moment is here. They start replaying things they once dismissed, the quiet conversations, the times you listened without judgment, the patience you carried even when things were confusing. At the time, those moments felt normal. Now they feel rare. The mind does something strange when faced with loss. It sharpens memory. It highlights the details that once seemed small. A laugh, a look, a moment of calm presence when everything else in life felt chaotic. And the avoidant begins to see the contrast. Because the world is full of noise, full of shallow attention, full of people who offer excitement but not depth. But what they had with you carried something different, something steady, something real. That realization creates pressure inside them, the kind that cannot be solved by running. Because the more they distance themselves, the clearer it becomes that the connection did not disappear. It simply moved beyond their reach. And the human mind hates unfinished stories. It wants resolution. It wants closure. It wants to know if something meaningful can still be reclaimed. So the avoidant begins to lean toward the place they once avoided, not with loud declarations, not with dramatic gestures. Their nature rarely moves that way. Instead, it begins quietly, a message after a long silence, a small check-in, a reaction to something you share, a subtle step back into the space they once left. But here is where the real transformation matters, because this moment is not about proving your worth. That part is already done. You proved it through patience, through presence, through the way you cared when it mattered most. This moment is about something deeper. Holding your ground. You no longer bend yourself to make someone comfortable with distance. You no longer shrink your voice to keep someone from running. You no longer carry the responsibility for someone else's fear of intimacy. Instead, you stand in a new place, a place where your ene,